Okay, so thanks everybody for showing up today, and excited to chat with you guys about the workshop and any questions you might have regarding character design and design in general. My name's Nate Wragg, and I went to school for animation and animation design at California Institute of the Arts, CalArts, down here in Southern California. I studied there for a couple of years, and after that I left to take an internship at a small animation studio, James Baxter Animation. He's a pretty amazing animator, and for a while he had his own studio, and so I was there for a summer learning under him. And then I took an internship up at Pixar on Ratatouille, just helping out and doing little bits of design here and there, and some designs that I had done ended up turning into a title sequence at the end of the movie. I don't know if you saw it, so that kind of snowballed my career into Pixar and helped me get established there as I designed the credits, and there was a short and a children's book and a whole lot of stuff. So I was at Pixar for about 3.5 years and worked both on Ratatouille. There's a short on that film, the DVD, Your Friend the Rat, and also character design for Toy Story 3. And then I left Pixar and moved back to LA. And right now I'm working at Dreamworks, and just sort of been bouncing around there doing different variations of design, as far as a little bit of character design here, a little bit of environment design. I designed a title sequence for, or animated trailer for Puss in Boots, which they're not going to use, but it may appear on the DVD or whatnot as like a bonus feature or an Easter egg or whatever. But yeah, and so pretty much that's what I'm up to now as far as work goes. Most of the projects are too far out to get into too many specifics about them, but Puss in Boots is coming out soon, and you'll see, I think when the Art of book comes out, maybe a few drawings, designs, and paintings I did for that film. Yeah, so what you're seeing here too, just so you know, just a slideshow I put together of different designs and paintings and concepts and stuff I've done. Right now there's some Buttercup designs that I did for Pixar, Toy Story 3. Yeah, that's pretty much where I'm at, so I guess we can start with the questions and such.
Okay, well, basically I'm waiting for everyone to start entering their questions in. I think they're all captivated by your amazing artwork you're displaying there, Nate. But that aside, I'll start with the first question from Ismail, who's a regular, it seems, to the actual Q&A sessions. Hello, Ismail.
Great.
His question is, when applying to be a character designer, should your portfolio have props, environments, as well as characters?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. Thanks for the question, Ismail. Yeah, I think one thing that's most important about applying for any design job or job within animation is to really know what you're applying for. So if you are applying for character design, you're going to want, obviously, the portfolio to be heavily loaded with your variations of design and style and different characters that you may have created. But also it's always good to include props, layouts, backgrounds. You don't want to you don't want to just do characters. You want to show that you can put your character, say, in an environment or interacting with props or items, and show that basically they can be animated. What I mean by that is, when I try and design characters, sure, there's exploration parts and parts where you're doing front and side views, and you're showing that you can turn the character. But you definitely, if you're designing, say, some musical monsters like that, or if you're designing, let's say, here's an example: a monster and a kid in a bed. You're going to want to show the bed. You're going to want to show everything that you can that best helps tell the story of the character. So I think it's a great idea in your portfolio to show that you can draw props, that you can, design some layouts that your characters can be in. And one thing too to consider with props is, in a film, props aren't just, oh, let's just design a chair for a movie. Every movie has its own style, just like every movie has its own way of designing the characters. So it's good to show that you can match the style of your characters to the style of the props, if that makes sense. If you have really exaggerated and wacky character designs, like, say, in a film like Madagascar or Ratatouille, you're going to want to show the props to have a certain level of caricature or exaggerated proportions that match those seen in the characters, if that makes sense.
Ismail, if you're there, let us know. But I'll go on to ask, so is that more of an organic process for you, or is it something that you follow as far as a particular sequence of, let's say, steps or something?
As far as designing props?
Yeah, do you approach it in a meticulous way, or you just let it happen based off of what you're referencing and so on?
Yeah, I try and when I'm designing props and stuff, I try and first gather reference. When I was working on Ratatouille and I was doing a lot of different props for the movie, when we need to design, say, a phone booth for the movie, I think if you remember, there's a phone booth that I'm drawing a blank on his name, the bad guy. Anyways. He's basically on the phone and in this phone booth, and we had to get reference for what our phone booths look like in Paris. We didn't want to just do the standard, red London phone booth. So we wanted to, find out what does a phone booth look like in Paris. So we got reference. Once we figured out what type of phone booth we wanted to design, then we started applying the sort of caricatured wonkiness, for lack of a better description, to style the phone booth. So it wasn't like it looked like a realistic phone booth in a world with animated, sort of wacky-looking characters. It was, oh yeah, the phone booth should fit the style and proportions and exaggerations that the characters do. So if you look at that movie again and you look at the buttons that he's pushing and stuff like that, details inside the phone booth and stuff, you'll see that, every button, in that film, everything was slightly uneven, not crazy to a point that it was distracting. But if you pause any sort of still or moment in the film, you can look at the elements in the background and you can see everything has a little bit of a wonky unevenness. It's a little bit exaggerated or pushed in slight different ways. Nothing is clean and straight and even. And so we applied the same thinking to the phone booth as we would apply to designing a pot or a pan or a door or a scooter, car, whatever. So that's, when I'm designing a prop for any film, I try and just keep in mind what is the shape language of the characters, the shape language of the film that we're going for, and then just use it almost as a filter to apply to my design thinking when I'm designing elements for the film.
Awesome. And Ismail says that's an awesome answer, and thanks.
Cool.
He also has a couple more questions, so we'll just go down the line here. What are 3 to 5 essential pieces an outstanding portfolio should contain?
3 to 5 pieces a portfolio should contain?
Yes. Like, what are the 3 to 5 essential pieces Like,
Okay,
is there
I would
actually a
say,
number you would say, or is that just arbitrary?
is there a number of pieces to include in a portfolio?
Well, I'm asking that personally, but he is asking,
Oh,
what are those essential pieces? Like, what should be in a portfolio?
I would say if I was going, if I'm putting together a portfolio, one thing that I think is essential, and it kind of strings together a few different images, so I guess it would make up about 3 or 4 concrete ones, is I like seeing process. I like seeing how somebody goes from sketches to final illustration, because a lot of, somebody may have, really good sketches and stuff, but they may not have the ability to really clean something up or tie it down. So what I like to see is, I like to generally see a page or two of say, sketches, rough concepts, doodles of a character design. Then I like to see a more honed finish take on that character, as far as showing that you've been able to make some compromises and come up with something a bit more concrete. Then I like to see like a pose sheet of that character, and a pose sheet, by that I mean, characters sort of acting in different ways, whether they're not just sort of standing there with a frown on their face or with a smile, but, if you're designing, say, a waiter in a restaurant, you're going to want to show, this character in action. What does it look like when he's carrying a tray? What does it look like when he's pouring a drink? Or if he's, dropped food all over somebody, or if he's carrying his too many heavy plates. All of these things, you want to think about how he might be animated on screen and illustrate those in various poses on a pose sheet. And then next to that, I would like to see either a final sort of painted illustration of a character in an environment, as kind of like a movie moment. So, for example, I'll take that waiter cue again, like I was just mentioning. It would be cool to say, see a waiter, walking through a restaurant carrying a tray with tons and tons of glasses on it, and you get and let's say there's a, I don't know, he's about to trip on something or whatnot. I'm just thinking off the top of my head, but you're going to want to come up with a sort of movie moment, so to speak, that shows not only can you design a character and put him in an environment, but you can add story to that, in the sense that when you're looking at it, you think, oh wow, I'm looking at, basically a moment from a film or a moment from an animated feature. And what's so important about that is, designs and concepts and sketches are all super fun, and it's a blast to try and come up with wacky new ways of drawing things, but in the end we are designing for animation, and you want to see that those characters can animate, that they can be in the sequence, they can be in the film doing what they need to do. So showing them in a sort of movie moment-esque illustration not only shows that you can take something from sketch until finish, but it also shows that you're thinking of story, you're thinking of how these characters will be seen on screen, and those sort of 4 things are things I really like to see. And then you can expand on that throughout your portfolio. You should do several different movie moments or moments with different types of characters and different situations. I think it's good to also show a range, not only in style, whether it's illustrating with pencil and pen and paint, or also just show that you can vary up different styles. And I don't mean like, copying, all the best character designers. I just more or less mean show that you can design something somewhat realistic, you can design something very exaggerated, very pushed, very cartoony. It's important to know whether you're sending your portfolio also into a studio that's 2D or 3D, because if you're sending it to, say, studio like Disney or Dreamworks or Pixar, they love seeing all the 2D designs, which is fun, and so do I. But I've been in enough meetings and conversations where it comes up, if somebody's only showing sort of wacky 2D drawings, somebody says, well, these are beautiful, but can they design for 3D? So you're going to really want to show that you can draw characters with proportion and turn and show that they don't just look good from one angle in a wacky pose. They look good in every type of pose, turning three-dimensional space. Those are some key things to just keep in mind. I mean, I don't think there's a set number of things. You know, we don't, looking at a portfolio, you don't go down a list trying to check things off and go, oh, okay, he's got that, he's got that, he's got that. But you want to see some major things. So I think those are a couple of things to really keep in mind.
Awesome. Great answer, Nate. And I think Ishmael likes that too.
Oh, cool.
The next question, the comment was awesome workshop, is can you compare / contrast the working environments of Pixar versus Dreamworks? This is from David Tress.
Sure. Yeah. I think, you know, it's funny, I get that question a lot from people wondering how they both are. And to be completely honest, they both are good and bad in different ways. And what I mean by that is, you know, it's before you get into a big studio, or, you know, I'll just speak from personal experience. When I was in school, you have this idea of what it's like to work professionally, what it's like to work at a place like Pixar or Dreamworks, and, you know, it seems like a fantasy or a, you know, perfect job environment. And at the end of the day, the thing to remember is they are just jobs. They're good jobs. They're great jobs. I mean, you're getting to draw, paint, design for a living, but they have their pros and cons just like any other type of job does, and it's a business. So I think, you know, while Dreamworks does some things great and some things kind of not so great, the same can be said for Pixar. I think, you know, one thing I really love about Pixar is, you know, there was a really strong camaraderie, people that all felt like they were really working towards a project, you know, putting everything they had into it. One thing I really like about Dreamworks is it feels like as an artist you have a lot more opportunities to be more involved in the artistic process, get to do more things, and work in more styles. So, you know, in Pixar, you know, if you're a character designer, you get kind of just compartmentalized into character design. If you're working in sets and backgrounds, you just basically work in that. At Dreamworks, you can kind of bounce around and do a lot of different things. You know, you may be character designing on one film, you may be doing the color script on another, assuming you can do it. You know, they don't pigeonhole people as much into just one specific task as far as the art department goes. You know, this isn't anything with modeling or rigging or lighting or anything like that, just art department-wise. But I think in the end, you know, to be completely honest, I like both places the same. So.
Okay, well, David, let us know if that answered your question. Our next question is coming from Casey Schwartz. Casey asks, hey Nate, thank you for going over some shape principles during your workshop video. Can you recommend any other resources for learning more about shape theory, books, or did you learn primarily from CalArts/internships or personal observation? That was a multi-part question there, Nate.
Okay, so did I learn my shapes from school or just from experience? Basically?
Well, the first part of her question is, can you recommend any other resources for learning more about shape theory?
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, I mean, there's the best thing for me on it, or the thing that works best for me is I don't tend to go and look at books to just read based on shape theory or design theory. I like to learn from other artists and looking at their work and analyzing what's successful about their work. So, you know, for me, I learned a lot about, say, color and lighting and color design from Lou Romano when I was working at Pixar, just looking at his work, just talking with him and seeing you know, what he does and why he does things. And you know, for me, like, analyzing people's work that is successful and what's successful about it is kind of the way I go about it. And also, I mean, I'm sure there are plenty of books out there that are written for, you know, basically shape theory and design theory, but you know, I like to go to a bookstore and look in the art section and look at different artists' work and see what they're doing and what's successful about it. You know, I'll use an example for the artist Charlie Harper. If you have heard of him, he has a really classic, simple, very graphic way of designing. And just by looking at his work, you can start to see different things that he does, you know, balance curve versus straight and small versus thin as far as scale. I mean, I think that's, you know, kind of the main principle that I go off of, is trying to make things somewhat interesting, not make things even all the time. But I would recommend just going to, you know, bookstores, and if you can, you know, if you're in sort of if you're in Los Angeles, you know, there's a store over in Hollywood called Wacko, and it's got just a ton of different types of art books. If you can find a store like that that's got a wide range of art books, and just start looking around and looking at stuff, I think that will really help. But also, just, you know, if you're in school, if you're in a studio, you know, chat with your peers. You know, I learned a lot in school, and I think one of the most valuable things in school was being around peers and chatting with them and running my designs by them and seeing what they thought. And, you know, just learning from everything around you. What was the second part of the question?
Well, actually, you touched on all parts of the questions. I'll read it again,
okay.
but for the most part, Casey was asking for any recommendations or resources you have. Did you learn this primarily from going to Cal Arts or internships, or from personal observation? And I think you kind of touched.
A little bit of.
Continue. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. I was going to say, yeah. I think it's a little bit of everything then. You know, learning in school, and then obviously outside in the real world, just analyzing stuff, and I think that's the main thing, is make sure that when you're looking at work or designs, look at what is successful about it. You know, analyze it and see what are they doing that makes it what it is, that makes it work. And you know, it obviously takes some time, but I mean, you know, if you went today and picked up a book on, say, Jim Flora or Charlie Harper or Ronald Searle and just started looking at what they're doing, you can start to see what is successful about their drawing skill and their drawing style and their use of shape language. And you can start to catalog that in your mind as far as like, okay, so this is a cool way of approaching push shapes or muted colors or contrasting colors, or you know, straight versus thin, or I mean straight versus curve, or thick versus thin. So
awesome. Well, Casey, hopefully that answered all your questions. The next question I'm going to ask is from one of the offline sources, so give me a moment to pull it up here, sir.
sure.
That first one, let's see, make sure I haven't asked it already. Which artist does he draw inspiration from? So what artists do you draw inspiration from when you're putting your artwork?
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, I think some of the main artists that I draw inspiration from are, say, it's a combination of both classic artists and animation designers. I mean, for one, as far as classic artists, I really like Paul Klee. I really like Picasso. When it comes to, and I'm sure there's more, I just can't think of any off the top of my head, but Paul Klee and Picasso are pretty much my favorites. When it comes to animation design, you know, everybody from Mary Blair, Miroslav Sasek, Ronald Searle, let me think, Jim Flora, Tim Biskup. There's a whole lot. Trying to think. There's one guy I can't remember. He's older designer, but anyways, yeah. A lot of what I like to do is you know, just look at old Disney movies or animated films, or there's a couple of good books. Oh, and this is a good book. Just now that it's popping in my head, called Cartoon Modern. It's kind of harping back to the shape question, and as well as this one too, because the Cartoon Modern book chronicles a lot of the designers and illustrators that worked in the 50s and 60s in animation. And while I can't remember all of their names, you know, looking through that book, you'll see, you know, 100 different designers throughout time that worked on various projects, and you know, whether it's a commercial for cereal in 1960, or if it's you know, animated film, short film from the 70s or 50s, whatever. All the different designers are listed and stuff, and that's a really good book to look at. But other artists that I really like are like Karaz is wonderful for color and painting. His designs are just beautiful. Let me see. Trying to think. Yeah, I'm drawing a blank right now. But
no problem.
Guys in the industry now that are really inspiring are you know, like Teddy Newton. I worked with on Ratatouille, and he's probably the best character designer I've worked around. He just has a unbelievable ability to throw down a design with one line, very Hirschfeld-like, and it just jumps off the page and starts walking around basically in front of you. Nico Marley is wonderful, super talented, amazing draftsman. Carter Goodrich is great. Let's see, Lou Romano, fantastic. So there's a lot of designers working now, and I think too, another thing, you know, kind of answering this question and harping back to the other is, you know, the fact that we have this whole world that is basically art blogs and design blogs. Those are places that I go to every day and just sort of peruse around, looking for inspiration, looking for cool work, looking to just be inspired. And I think you know, if you can tap into that as well, then you know, you don't just have to go to a bookstore. You can just basically be on your laptop at home. And some of my favorite artists too are just, you know, putting their stuff up on blogs, and you know, they're just doing awesome work all the time.
Right. Well, thank you, Nate, for that. Quite an extensive list of inspiration there. The next question actually comes from Neil, who I think is currently offline. So Neil, you may have to get your answer later when you watch the recording of this. But Neil's question was, are there any key things you keep in mind when trying to create simple yet communicative poses?
Anything I try and keep in mind? Yeah, a couple of things. For one, you just want to make sure that the pose that you're designing provides you the action, I guess, that you need. For example, if you're going to draw somebody, you know, say carrying a tray of glasses, you know, if that's a heavy tray, you need to make sure that the pose you put the character in really says that that's a heavy tray. I just try and think story whenever I'm thinking pose. You know, the motion is going to come through in that. You know, if you're drawing a guy reaching for something really high, of course you're going to get, you know, all the motion in there and the stretch and squash that you need. But I try and really think about what the story is of the pose and what I'm trying to say with it, and that helps me push it into a world where it's believable. I'm not just looking at, oh, here's a guy with his arm up. I'm looking at a guy who's really struggling to reach something. If he's really struggling to reach something, I want to make sure I'm getting that in the drawing. And then after that, I make sure that I'm thinking about everything as far as, structure, making sure the character looks like he's standing up, making sure characters look like, there's a good squash and stretch level to it. If the character's got really long arms and I want him to feel like he's really reaching for something, I'm going to really push that as well, make it feel like he's stretching. I can sort of do a design for you right now. Can you see my screen all right?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay.
And I think Neil got back online, so this is an answer to your question, Neil.
So if I'm drawing a guy reaching for something off a shelf, I'm not just going to do this. I'm going to make sure if he's really struggling, I'm going to try and make sure that he's really getting that action line in there. Making sure that the pose is bold and really says, oh, I'm reaching, I'm really struggling for something. I'm really trying to reach really high rather than just, oh yeah, here's a guy with his arm up. So I think when I'm thinking about a pose, it kind of goes back to what I was saying about the character pose sheet. You want to think about who this character is and what they're going to be doing in the film as far as range of emotions, range of motions, acting and stuff. Here's, if you look at this waiter guy, I tried to think of a lot of different things that he could be doing. With this, it's the same thing. If I'm just going to say be drawing a guy who's really reaching for something, I want to make sure that I get that emotion in there, that, squash and the stretch, the action, the acting basically in there that says this is a guy who's really reaching for something, not just lifting his arm.
Right. Very cool. So Neil, I hope you saw that. He was answering your question in regards to, what things you keep in mind when trying to create simple yet communicative poses. Our next question is from David again. He has a funny question. Where does your affinity for Sasquatches come from?
Where does it come from? I don't know. A couple years ago, I think I was just sketching some monster, and he just sort of was just doodling, and I think I drew something. It's kind of mischievous. And I literally just came from a doodle, and from then on it just sort of felt like a character I wanted to draw, and I just sort of really got into Sasquatches and Yetis from then on. I don't know why. It just I think I've always had a love for drawing monsters and fictional sort of characters and creatures and stuff, and one day I just drew what looked like a little monster, and then when I went to paint him, I painted him white like a Yeti and was like, oh, that's pretty cool. And then I just sort of kept drawing that character, like for no real reason. I just enjoyed sort of drawing him, and it came it came to whatchamacallit. It came to be just a character that I just sort of took on and started drawing. So now I'm sort of, I don't want to use the term obsessed, but you know, I definitely really like it. I like drawing Sasquatches and Yetis, and I've gone to my wife and I drove up the coast and we saw all these different Sasquatch sighting places and stuff like that up Northern California. It's pretty cool. I'd like to go up and spend some more time up there.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And a follow-up to that particular question is, how did you land on your personal style? That's also from David.
How did I land on what?
On your personal style.
Oh. My personal style, I think that's something that's just sort of always evolving. You know, in school, a lot of my work felt sort of inspired by the artists that I was looking at, and I think that's somewhat natural. I, you know, tended to, you know, say really like different designers and pretty much everybody that I was looking at, my style was sort of evolving from that. And then once I got out of school and I started working on projects for myself, and I was sort of away from, you know, looking at artists all the time and sort of, you know, constantly referencing stuff, I started to develop my own style with a comic that I did, which was Milton's Mustache. I have an example of that. I'll just open it up real quick. Yeah. And what it basically became, or was sort of, I found that I liked mixing collage elements with painted elements and sort of pushed character designs from that sort of hark back to like the 50s and 60s of animation design. So for me, I did this, it's like a comic book type thing in a compilation of stories for this Pixar thing that we did. And this was the first time I left school that I created some stuff that felt like I was beginning to find my own style. So then once I started working in it and really enjoying sort of the work that was coming out and feeling like, oh yeah, I'm sort of making progress, feeling like I'm liking the work I'm doing, I just tried to analyze what it is that I was actually doing that I liked, that I felt was working for me. Kind of like I was talking about, you know, look at artists and analyze what they're doing and try and just look at what you like about what they're doing, and I just tried to keep pushing it. And this piece was done digitally in the computer. So moving forward, what I wanted to do was actually paint stuff by hand. And I have another example of that, which, just give me 1 second. This is sort of the same idea as far as style goes. If you can see both of those, but the one on the left of the two characters, that's all painted in collage and paint and real media, and this piece right here is all painted digitally. So for me, I didn't want to just have my style be dependent on working in the computer. I wanted to really be able to do it by hand, and with getting elements of collage bits into my work and real media and paint and texture, it seemed like it only made sense to learn to make it work with real media. So now, you know, it's become just sort of a way I paint and draw when I do my own stuff. As far as just style goes in general when designing for animation, I mean, if I'm doing my own project, it's kind of this style. It's what I like doing. If I'm working on a feature, then I just try and match the style of the show. You know, it's kind of two different worlds. But for my own personal style, that's kind of how I developed it.
Awesome. That's actually very fascinating. And I can see now a lot of the Picasso influence in your work as well, looking at these pieces in particular.
Yeah.
Kind of
yeah,
cool.
that sort of abstract, caricatured way.
Very cool. Stephanie asks, what separates a character design portfolio from a visual development portfolio?
Okay. Well, I think the thing that I think most separates it, and it's kind of something I've seen a lot from a lot of people's work, is people tend to specialize in one or the other. And visual development tends to be more, and not always, but this is just from what I've seen, tends to be more environment and color and layout design concepts, like big picture concepts for how like the look of a film would be. Character design portfolios tend to be more heavily weighted with various forms of stylization for design, pose, caricature, acting poses, showing that you have a wide range of ability to design various different characters. I personally think that visual development portfolios should have more character work in them. I don't always see that, but that's generally what I see separates them. Is a lot of times character designers don't think about designing the environments that their characters are in, and visual development designers often don't think about the characters that they're are going to be in the environment. Like, they may think of them, but they just don't draw them that often. People tend to specialize in both, and I personally think it's stronger. It makes you a stronger artist if you can not only think about both, but apply both to your portfolio. That's kind of why earlier I was mentioning that one thing I really like seeing when I'm looking at a portfolio, and I try and include in my portfolios, is not only, let me gather a couple of examples, not only just doing say, character design like this, for example, but also, and this is going to be a different character, but also, say, putting it in a story position, showing more than just a character standing in a static pose. It's like, oh, here's an environment that they're in. Here's a little action, a guy's, flying over probably a little love letter to another mountain. Or, let's see, here's another piece, not just a character design of the Sasquatch, but there's an interaction with a warrior who's hiding up the tree, and the Sasquatch is burning down the tree. So I try and just keep those types of things in mind when I'm working on designs. Here's a wide range of shrink them down, of warriors, and then if I can find it real quick. Here could be, this is an old example, something I did a long time ago, but here we have below some warriors, showing different forms of design and variation that they could be, and then here is, say, an illustration taking, say, one of them, even though this guy isn't down there, and putting him in an environment that says not only that this is for visual development, but this is also showing character work. And I think if you include both of those in your portfolios, you're going to look very valuable to any company, because they're going to say, oh, not only can this artist design characters, but they can also think about how they are in layout, how they are going to be in the film, how they are going to be in movie moments. So I think if you can try and include both, that's always good. If you don't need to include both, then just make sure you know what you're putting your portfolio towards, you know what you need to design, and focus on that.
Awesome. And actually, a good follow-up question that David asked was, what are things to avoid in creating a portfolio?
Okay. Well, the best best thing to avoid is do not draw any pre-existing characters. I know that may sound obvious, but you'd be surprised. Don't show that you can draw all the characters from Finding Nemo or from Madagascar or from Ratatouille or even Mickey Mouse or something like that. It's if you want to show, if you're say going to submit a character design portfolio for say a exaggerated pushed 2D project, you're going to want to show that you can design in an exaggerated and pushed stylized way. You're not going to want to design their characters unless they ask for it. Usually, if you are in a case where you're designing characters for a specific show, it's like a test. And I know that they do that oftentimes in television where you'll submit your portfolio and then they'll say, okay, well, we want you to do a test where you sort of show that you can design our type of characters in our style. But I think it's generally important to avoid in your portfolios designing anything that looks like you're just either copying a pre-existing movie or somebody else's work. That also may be kind of obvious too, but there are people out there that copy other people's work. They slightly change it. I've seen it done with some of my work before, and that's a big no-no, because if you are say copying somebody's work and then you submit your portfolio and that person happens to be looking at your portfolio, they're going to go, oh, that's funny, I don't remember submitting this drawing, and that's probably an easy way not to get considered for a job. But also too, I think a lot of students have this idea that they need to show a lot of life drawing in their portfolios, because I know a lot of school portfolios include that. You don't have to really include much of that, maybe one page to just show that you have an understanding for it if you want, but the portfolio that I send around now, if I'm sending it to another place or another studio, it doesn't have any life drawing in it. It just shows that I can design in lots of different styles and ways for animation, and shows that I have a good understanding of how that design influences the story, tells the story of the characters I'm designing.
Awesome. I have an offline question, basically asking, what are some of the challenges in your role you face as a character designer?
Some of the challenges in my role as a character designer?
Yeah, that you face.
Well, I think the biggest challenge is making sure that the characters that you're designing are functional. I'll get a new image to draw from here. If I'm going to say be designing a character, if I'm designing a character like this, and I've done this drawing and it needs to be, say, designed for 3D, then I'm going to have an interesting challenge ahead of me as showing how I can draw this type of character in 3D space. So I think the biggest challenge for me is always making sure that my concepts can become functional. It was one thing I tried to sort of touch on in the workshop, which is basically, there's a time and a place to explore and, really come up with a fun design that, really says this is the character, and then you need to actually make it work. If I was going to try and make this guy work for actual, 3D, just going to slightly sketch here.
And actually, while you're doing that, Nate, there was a question by Lily G in regards to how important is anatomy when it comes to creating stylized characters, since you're already on this subject, in a way.
Anatomy is important it's important to have a good understanding of how you draw a person, how they stand, how their weight is proportioned. It's also important to not be too tied to that, if you know what I mean, because if you are designing a pushed, exaggerated, animated character, you're not going to want to think about what's the bone and muscle structure underneath that character and their organs. You're just going to want to think about pose and how the body stands naturally. So I think while anatomy is important, mostly, having a good understanding of life drawing and how people stand and sit and move and reach and twist and bend, like that's all stuff that's really more important to know than just anatomy, how things are connected. And again, when you start thinking about turning something in 3D, if you're working on something that's pretty stylized, then you're going to want to sort of think about how does this character turn. If you're working on something that's a bit more realistic, then you're going to want to know more about anatomy. So I think the best way to describe that is the more realistic your design is, the better your understanding of anatomy should be. The more caricatured and exaggerated your design is, the less understanding you need of sort of medical anatomy, if you know what I mean, just like the inner workings of a character of a person. But you're always going to need that basic understanding of how do people stand, how do they twist, how do they bend, how does their weight distribute when they walk. That type of motion and gesture anatomy is really important, especially if you're going to design characters, because it's pretty obvious. I mean, if you see a design that doesn't look like it has a good weight to it, or a gesture or a pose, kind of like this compared to this, a good understanding of reaching, and if you're reaching for something, does your other arm pull up, when you're reaching for something? If you're on one foot, is your other foot on a tiptoe, still trying to create a little bit of balance? Weight yourself the other way. So I think gesture anatomy and pose anatomy is really important, just to see what people are doing, and honestly, you can get a lot of that from just watching people, just watching how people move, or if you need to come up with a good pose, acting in front of the mirror, you may feel like a weirdo at first, or what, but I always do that if I'm trying to think of a pose and I can't imagine exactly how it actually moves. I stand in front of the mirror and I just act it out myself. I see people do that all the time. When I was up at Pixar, and they may have it at Dreamworks, when I was up at Pixar, there was an actual acting room for the animators that was just covered in mirrors, had video recording devices so that you could basically record yourself or act or jump around or do whatever you needed, and see how your body moved, and to have an understanding of that is really important. But here, going back to the sort of functionality, you could see this as being more of a design that has some shape to it. It's kind of based more in 3D space than, say, something like this, where both eyes are on one side of the head. There's this really extreme design. This is, I'm not saying that this is the best design that I could come up with, but just on the fly, this is a way of thinking about how the design on the left could be sort of translated more into a 3D turning shape. So.
Awesome. We have about 5 more minutes or so I'll ask a couple more questions. One good offline question that I saw was, what advice would you have for an international artist trying to get a job at a company like Dreamworks?
Okay. I think the most important thing is, and I'm assuming that you'd be applying for art, is it doesn't actually matter where you come from. If somebody sends in a cool portfolio from Paris or Denmark or South Africa, wherever, it doesn't matter where they're from. It just matters if they can draw, and they can draw well. So I don't think there's necessarily any specific advice that I can offer as far as the applying process. I would just say make sure your portfolio really sings. Make sure it's, shows everything that you'd be applying for and shows that you're an adequate and equipped designer for what you're basically going to be applying for. I think once I think definitely, the whole working from another country, coming to another country to work, there's some complications with that, but, places like Pixar and Dreamworks and Sony and wherever, those studios are equipped with not only people who have come from other countries to work at, which you could talk to about any of the sort of intricacies of that, but the studios are used to it, so they have a good understanding and would be able to help you through any sort of questions or suggestions you might be looking for. But I'd say portfolio-wise, just make sure that you are showing everything that you can that shows that you are a designer that the studio should hire. That does not matter where you're from.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Nate. Our next question is from Stefan. Aside from gathering reference and drawing from scribbles to find new character shapes, are there other types of exercises you do in the early stages to explore characters or ideas?
Well, I think definitely paying attention just in life around the people that you're around, picking up on the ways that people act and just are in the real world is a great way to draw inspiration for characters. I mean, I think most TV shows, movies, stories, they're all somewhat written based off of experience and reality. So oftentimes, if I'm at a place, like a while ago, I did some character designs from a roller skating rink that me and my wife and some friends went to, and there were some people there that they were so crazy looking, I couldn't have possibly imagined them on my own, and I just tried to take mental pictures and remember what they were wearing, who they were, what they were doing, and just take cues off of that and let that sort of inspire some caricatures or new designs. I think that's probably sounds somewhat generic, but it's pretty concrete as far as looking at the people around you and drawing inspiration from them. I think that's one way that I always try and sort of get new ideas. And with a sketchbook, you can doodle some stuff down or write ideas down based off of what you see, but that's a good way to go about it too.
Right. Well, I guess a good follow-up question would be also from Ismail, who asks, well, how much time are you given to design a character for a film? 1 day, 1 week, 1 month?
Yeah, so that varies based on the project. You'll work on some projects where, when I worked on Toy Story 3, I started designing on that in 2007, and it came out last year. So, that was 3 years before the movie even came out. We started drawing on it. And I worked on, there's a character in that film, Buttercup. It's a white unicorn that I designed, and I worked on that character on and off for a year. It was a long process of just finding the right design that they wanted to go with. In other cases, you'll work for a production where they're like, we need that character design yesterday. So you've got, a day or two to work on something. If it's an important character in a film, it probably won't be that fast. You'll definitely have, a few weeks or a month at the least. But it all depends on the production schedule. If they've slotted out a lot of time for design and back and forth to really make it right, then you'll have several months, maybe even a year or so, to work on main characters. If it's a quicker production, if it's like a short film or an animated short subject or commercial or something like that, then you're going to have much less time. And in some cases, it can be as short as a few days or a week. So, yeah.
Awesome. So I think we have time for one more question. So I apologize if I don't ask all the questions I just seen popped up here. But let me see if any stand out. Not that the questions are important. But I think the next question, and I think will be our last question, is, let's see. There's a question that's asking, I see a lot of character design work that is more flat and graphic. Is it common for there to be specific artists like Paul Lassany for Surf's Up, whose role is to take the extreme graphic shapes and try to translate it into a more dimensional concept?
So basically, is it normal for artists to work together, somebody that works graphic and somebody that works in a less graphic way to sort of meet in the middle? Is that kind of the question?
Let me just see if I can rephrase it. I guess basically, yeah, something along the lines of, well, I guess Casey is asking, like based on her observation, a lot of the work that she sees is more flat and graphic. And is there some like a particular artist that comes in and takes, let's say, something that's more graphic and translate it into a three-dimensional concept?
Yeah, so there can be, you know, in an example, you know, when they were designing on The Incredibles, you could look at Teddy Newton's design. You know, Teddy Newton and Tony Chili worked together, and even though, you know, Teddy can draw in a three-dimensional way, you know, if he wants to, he tends to be a little bit more loose and graphic and stylized, and Tony is more grounded in animation and sort of that type of design. So they worked really well together to meet in the middle and sort of co-design all the characters for Incredibles together. I think in general, as a character designer, though, you should be able to take a flat design, a design that feels somewhat flat, stylized, and graphic, and make it a three-dimensional design. That's sort of going back to what I was saying with portfolios before. Is, you know, I'll look at a portfolio and we'll see one on the table, and they've got a bunch of flat, great designs, and then someone will say, well, these are great, but, you know, can they draw for 3D? Can they turn these? And it's, you know, it's kind of an issue. It's not, we don't have a specific, or at least from what I've gathered, there isn't a specific design setup where people just design graphic and then they give it to a guy to make it work. In general, as a character designer, you should be able to turn your drawings in 3D space, and then you work on how they actually physically become models with the modeling team. You know, you give them your designs and show all different poses and angles and front, side, top, and bottom. Give it to the modeler. They do their first pass on modeling it, and then you do go back and forth until the character design is right in the computer with the modeler. So, yeah, there isn't a pipeline that takes graphic drawings and gives them to guys that can turn them. But I think the artists that can take a graphic drawing and design it that way and then also design it for 3D are much more valuable. And as a character designer, I think it's kind of important. It's one of the main things that I would look for if I was hiring somebody for character design.
Awesome. Well, I think that's a good point to basically leave off. I'd like to thank everyone who attended today's live Q&A, and especially I'd like to thank Nate Wragg for his amazing talent and just giving us his time on this Saturday for just answering all your questions. For those of you who are still looking forward to seeing other live Q&As, we have other workshops available on the site. So please check out the up-and-coming new just workshops and artists and the live Q&A sessions. And again, our workshops will be available for purchase for a much longer time than before. And for those of you who want more extensive just training or knowledge or what have you, we also have masterclass series. So please be sure to check out the masterclass site as well. But aside from that, again, thank you, Nate, for such an awesome, wonderful period of just answering questions. And I look forward to seeing more of your work. And I think everybody here appreciates your time. And thanks you very much for your workshop.
Yeah, well, thank you, everybody, for tuning in and all the great questions. I'm happy to help in any way I can, and hope you enjoy the workshop.
Awesome. And we're getting a bunch of just you rocks and you're awesome. So I think they greatly appreciate it. And yes, thank you all for attending, and I'll catch you guys on the next workshop. Take care. Bye.